communication is vital in a disaster, particularly when you're planning for a disaster. Open and clear communication when creating your plan is vital. So our next two speakers will address the role of communication in more detail. First up, we have Beth Lander, who is the college librarian, the College of Physicians in Philadelphia.
Thank you for the introduction. It's wonderful to follow Emily. That was a wonderful summary of what everyone should be worrying about. In full disclosure, I just want everybody to know that I resigned my position with the college this week. And as of August 3rd, I will be the managing director of the Philadelphia Area Consortium for Special Collections Libraries. So I've included my generic email address on the screen because I don't use a lot of text-based slides at all. So if you have any questions later, you can certainly email me at that address. Today, I'm going to discuss how disaster management planning should be an effective component of any building expansion. I work at the College of Physicians of Philadelphia, which is home to the Historical Medical Library and our evil stepsister, the Motor Museum. So we have a very varied and strange collection. I will be giving a brief overview of our current disaster management status, and then I will outline what drove the college to consider a building expansion. I will conclude with a tale of ignorance and poor communication and offer suggestions as to how you can avoid what could, for us, have been multiple calamities. For now, a bit of background. The college, founded in 1787, is the oldest medical fellowship in the United States. The Historical Medical Library was founded in 1788, and the museum was opened in 1863, founded upon Dr. Thomas Mutter's bequest in 1858. Our current location at 22nd and Market Streets in Philadelphia is the college's second permanent location. The current building was built in 1909 at a time when the museum mostly served the medical community with only some visitation from the public. The library houses over 350,000 items, including books, manuscripts, photographs, and works of art in two stack areas. The first is original to the building and is a Harry Potter-esque confection of cast iron shelving and partial translucent glass floors. The second was built in the early 1950s. The collection documents 1,000 years of medical history, and to highlight its weirdness, it includes the largest collection of confirmed anthropodermic books in the world. The Mutter Museum is home to 28,000 anatomical specimens, models, and medical instruments exhibited in a 19th century cabinet museum setting. The museum helps the public to understand the mysteries and beauty of the human body and to appreciate the history of diagnosis and treatment of disease. In addition to the museum and library, the building is home to educational programs that serve student communities within the Philadelphia School District. It also has an active medical fellowship of over 1,000 members and an events, rental, and catering service. Our annual visitation prior to the pandemic exceeded 170,000 people. Overcrowding could be an issue, particularly on weekends, with some Saturdays exceeding 1,200 people. And that's just in the museum, a space that is a little over 9,000 square feet. Space usage can be compromised on Fridays and Saturdays, days when we have the most rental events which use rooms throughout the building. For example, a wedding in warm months will begin with a ceremony in our medicinal garden, which is then followed by cocktails or dinner in Thompson Gallery on the first floor. This will shut down both spaces to museum visitors by 2:30 p.m. in order to allow the catering staff time to set up, reducing the space available to museum visitors at the height of our weekend visitation by a couple of thousand feet. At times, really expansive weddings or parties, the ones that move throughout all spaces outside of the museum itself, will require setup while museum visitors are in the space. So let me review our disaster management planning before I throw myself headfirst down the rabbit hole of our building expansion. I come from a long line of volunteer firefighters and professional EMTs. I'm married to an attorney, and therefore I am hardwired to look at something and to see everything that can possibly go wrong. Here is a grand example of a small error that turned into a very large problem at my alma mater, Drew University, in 1989. Mead Hall is a Greek Revival mansion that was built in 1832 that serves as the administrative office space for the university. During a basic renovation, workers used a blowtorch to remove wallpaper, which ignited a fire within the walls of the building that burned for more than 6 hours during the workday before it was detected. The fire raged for 23 hours before it was extinguished. And this was the result of just a minor renovation project. A cautionary tale indeed. There was no disaster management plan at the College of Physicians until I began work on one in 2016. The only consideration given to an emergency up to that point was the evacuation plan in case of fire. There are many aspects of the building, the museum, and the library that lend to catastrophe, but I want to hold off on outlining them for a moment because they become more important in discussing the potential catastrophe of a building renovation. When I began the planning process, I decided to use D-Plan from the Northeast Document Conservation Center, otherwise known as NEDCC. And the plan is, and I quote from their website, a free online program that provides a template that allows museums, libraries, archives, and other cultural institutions of all sizes to develop a customized disaster preparedness and response plan. NEDCC will be updating D-Plan soon, which is good because in its current iteration, it is cumbersome and challenging to update. However, it is extremely comprehensive, which forces an institution to consider aspects of disaster management that they may not normally think about. Things like insurance coverage and business continuity, something that we are all struggling with at this moment. The greatest weakness of D-Plan for us is that our museum contains hundreds of human remains, many of which are stored in alcohol. D-Plan gives little consideration to very unique collections like ours. I created a planning group across all departments after initially obtaining D-Plan. And in gathering the departments together, I made sure that we were covering all of the functions of the college itself. I broke D-Plan's planning templates up between everyone, and once they were completed, I collated them into a final draft, which we then began to test using tabletop exercises. And I have to say, having access to firefighters and EMTs provided endless creative options for creating virtual mayhem in tight spaces. The ultimate goal will be to update the current plan to reflect staff reorganization that has occurred over the past year, and then to commit to staff training, something that began last summer with active threat training that then got put on hold because, as you all know, there is always something else that takes precedence. In 2017, the college embarked on a capital campaign to expand the footprint of the Mutter Museum into the original section of library stacks. At that time, Anna Doty, the curator of the Mutter, and I both reported to Dr. Robert Hicks, who was then the head of collections and our representative to senior staff. Dr. Hicks retired this past December. The expansion project was ostensibly done to ease the issue of overcrowding, an issue that is problematic exactly 67 days out of the year. No other control methods, such as time ticketing, were attempted to mitigate the problem. Board members and development staff assumed it was better to spend upwards of $20 million to alleviate a problem that occurs 18% of the time. In the course of this project, from the fall of 2017 until the fall of 2019, Anna and I participated in a single planning meeting, and that was with the architects in November 2017. The two people with the most knowledge of collections, their use, their movement in and out of the building, and their storage were literally never part of the planning process. Anticipating Dr. Hicks' retirement, Anna and I were elevated to senior staff in late 2019, and I leveraged that position to create a team of staff who could speak to the impact of a building project on collections, infrastructure, and visitor services. That team discovered that after gaining access to planning documents that had already been presented to the board, The costs and scope of the expansion project neglected all of the preparatory costs, like moving collections out of the building, as well as the costs of mitigation that would need to be done to ensure the safety of collections and visitors. For example, no consideration was given to the impact of vibrations on the building, an issue that has already become problematic just from guests dancing at weddings. Not only have sections of molding collapsed, but specimens on display in the museum actually shift on their shelves just from the vibrations of visitors walking during busy days. Sorry about this. No consideration was given to prophylactic pest control prior to construction. A really horrible example happened a year ago, 2 years ago, I'm sorry, when we added new bathrooms on one floor and renovated another on another floor, and the roach infestation that occurred when we opened the walls was a nightmare. No consideration was given to how the very heavy cast iron shelves in the old section of the library stacks were going to be safely removed. Vendors have suggested that the only way this cast iron can be removed is by using a plasma saw, which is a process that cuts through electrically conductive materials by means of an accelerated jet of hot plasma. And just think about that for a moment in closed stacks in which collections have not been removed. No consideration was given to the impact on those human remains we refer to as wet specimens, exceedingly rare, mostly 19th century objects that are stored in 70% alcohol. No consideration was given to changes in fire code post-expansion that would impact how much alcohol we could store in the building, a building that is also used for weddings and parties with a caterer who stores gallons of alcohol on the premises. No thought was given to the cost of preparing collections for potential removal from the building, including barcoding, boxing, and offsite storage. No thought was given to possible asbestos contamination, nor was consideration given to the dust and debris that would be created during construction, an issue that would have been extremely challenging since the powers that be intend to keep the museum open to visitors during construction. And most frightening, no thought was given to keeping egress spaces, and we have only 2, open during construction in order to be able to safely evacuate the building. This process revealed a number of weaknesses and problems that I hope will inform any expansion projects that might raise their ugly heads in your futures. A threat assessment should be done as part of a needs assessment for any building project. This absolutely must be done prior to any engagement with architects, contractors, or other planners. A needs assessment was never done in the course of our project, and the lack was evident. If you are not at a senior staff level, ensure that the person who is a good communicator. Your supervisor should have full knowledge of collections management issues and should be willing to be an advocate for your needs. They should also communicate all aspects of project planning to you. Building projects, as you may know, are often vanity projects. I believe this one was exactly that, a project crafted by a new development director at a time when board leadership was undergoing a generational change. It is important that you keep aware, if you can, of relationships and power plays that can evolve quietly over time. Understanding the dynamics in play above you makes you a better advocate for your collections. Basic disaster planning lets us consider the worst and plan around it. Disaster planning within a capital campaign and a building expansion requires us not to consider, but to expect the worst. Building expansions will unearth problems that you never knew existed. Architects will draw plans without fully understanding the demands made on your building or your collections. External contractors and builders will not treat your space or your collections gently. And obviously, administration will try to cut costs wherever they can and regardless of the impact. To avoid the worst, I suggest the following. Obviously, if you don't already have a disaster management plan in place, draft one. Make sure your administration approves the plan and then train your staff in its implementation. When discussions begin about any expansions or capital improvements, bring your plan to the table. Use it as a discussion piece to note potential points of damage to the building, damage to collections, potential theft of collections, or environmental contamination. Disaster management considerations should be part of any needs assessment. Let your architects, contractors, and workmen know that a disaster management plan is in place. Most contractors like when an organization has a plan in place because it will help to mitigate liability. Architects might not be thrilled because your plan may prevent them from, and I have heard this phrase more times in my career, building the space of their dreams. Our jobs as librarians, archivists, and museum professionals is to preserve, protect, and make available our collections. And sometimes that stewardship has to get a little muscular. While our closure due to COVID-19 brings a whole new set of problems to the college, one problem it has removed, at least for the time being, although I'm beginning to hear really scary whispers, is a building expansion. Thank you very much.